This is my grandpa. He was my absolute hero, a full-on mountain man who gave it all up to become just an accountant. Before the cancer took his mind, he had one last wish, a final hunt for him and me, tracking a beast he called the Shatterpaw, a trip meant to be medicine for the soul, even though I was holding a doctor's report that read inoperable brain tumor. Deep in the wilderness, I realized the terrifying truth. The beast he was hunting wasn't outside.
Back in the late 90s, I was just a teenager with hopes, dreams, and more than anything, a deep love for the wilderness. I got that from my grandpa. I swear if he hadn't met my grandma, the absolute love of his life, he would have turned into a full-on mountain man living off the land somewhere out in the Rockies. Instead, he settled down and became an accountant. Yeah, of all things. People always told me that if you met him during his office days, you'd never guess what kind of guy he really was. He looked like any short king in a button-down shirt and tie, average build, white-collar worker, nothing special. But the moment the weekend rolled around, it was like watching Clark Kent step into a phone booth and walk out as Superman. Grandpa would transform into this 5'6" Rambo, muscles packed tight under his work shirt, ready to take on the whole damn forest. By the time I started going hunting with him, he'd already retired from the office life, so I mostly knew the outdoor version of Grandpa, and he was my hero. Me, him, my older sister Jess, and Mom, we'd go hunting pretty often. Grandma and Dad couldn't take it though. Grandma hated the killing part, and Dad, well, I'm convinced he was the worst shot in the history of mankind. Eventually, he admitted he was a walking liability and decided he'd just stay home and prep the meat whenever we brought something back.
We had some of the happiest family times during those hunting trips. But like everything else, those days didn't last. Grandma got sick and passed away. Mom and Dad split up, and it wasn't exactly friendly. Grandpa and Dad never really talked again after that. Jess went off, got married, started her own family, and Grandpa, he got old. I stayed close. I ran a small general store in town, and Grandpa actually worked there with me after he retired. Worked is a generous term. Mostly he just sat in a wooden rocker on the porch, chatting with customers and telling stories. The store made good money, and honestly, paying Grandpa a wage just to sit outside being a local legend was one of the easiest decisions I ever made. He was genuinely the best friend I ever had. Grandpa lived in an assisted living home. It wasn't the strict kind. He could come and go whenever he wanted, and the staff was around if he needed anything. I asked him a bunch of times to move in with me and my partner, but he refused every single time. Said we didn't need some old man stinking up the place with his tobacco smoke. I told him I had a lousy sense of smell anyway and could barely notice his massive cigars. Then he reminded me that my long-suffering partner had perfectly fine olfactory senses. He had a point. If you ask me, though, I think he had a crush on one of the nurses and would rather die than admit it. One day on a weekend when both of us happened to be free, I decided to go visit him. Grandpa was more cheerful than usual that day, which was strange considering he was already one of the cheeriest old dudes you could ever meet. But this time, something about him felt bright, almost energized. His eyes had that spark he used to be when talking about the mountains or some wild camping story from decades ago. We played cards for a while, and he kept bursting into loud, wheezy laughter every time he won, or even when he lost. Eventually, I had to ask him what was going on. Something was definitely eating at him, and he was hiding it behind that big smile. When he finally told me, it hit me so hard I had to stand up. I remember walking toward the window, trying to steady myself. Outside, the sky hung heavy and gray. Rain pattered against the glass in slow, steady taps, cold, dreary, almost like the weather itself already knew what was coming. It felt too fitting. He handed me the letter. A letter from an oncologist he'd been secretly seeing. I don't remember every line, but the words that stuck, ones that carved themselves into my brain, were brain tumor, inoperable, affairs, in order. I stared through the window for what felt like forever, the rain blurring the world outside. Finally, I turned back to him, and I think, for the first time in my life, I was
angry at him. Truly angry. I asked him why the hell he was so damn cheerful, how he could let me walk in thinking he had some good news. He just smiled at me. Soft, gentle, quiet. Then he told me I'd understand when I was his age, 82 years old. He said he was finally going to see Grandma again. And my mom, his daughter, who had already passed by then. He told me that when you're old, knowing the end is coming isn't scary. It's like reaching the last chapter of a good, satisfying book. And honestly, compared to a lot of cancers, a brain tumor was a quicker way to go. I sat back down, letting the silence settle, listening to the faint hum of the rain, thinking. And eventually, I looked up at him and asked, "Hey, Grandpa, is there anything you want to do before the end?" And the second those words left my mouth, his whole face lit up, like he'd been waiting for me to ask that exact question. He said there was one that got away, a final hunt he wanted me to take him on. It wasn't easy, not even close. The old man needed a cane to walk, and sometimes even a wheelchair. But he refused the wheelchair for this trip. Of course he did. So we made our way deep into the woods, with him leaning heavily on that damn cane. And the hike, God, it was slow. Painfully slow. What used to be a one-day trek for us stretched into 4 full days of stopping to camp, stopping to rest, stopping to talk. And honestly, I think that was the whole point. He just wanted to be with me, out there, away from everything. It felt like medicine for the soul, for both of us. On day 5, we set up camp. The sun was dipping behind the tree line when Grandpa told me, "This is it. This is the spot." He waited until the last of the sun vanished. Then he sat me down and told me about the one that got away. He said it looked like a Bigfoot, but it wasn't. The first time he encountered it was when my mom was still a teenager, back when they used to hunt together. At first, he thought it was a werewolf. Then he reminded himself that werewolves don't wander around in broad daylight, and Bigfoots do. I paused and reminded him that none of those things were real. He waved me off like I was being ridiculous. He said it was neither of those things anyway. It didn't have a name. It was like a Wendigo or a skinwalker, but not exactly. He said he called it the Shatterpaw. I asked why, and he told me about the prints he'd seen the first time, footprints shaped like some kind of massive animal paw, but broken, twisted, like something had shattered every bone in it. The name stuck in his mind from that day on. Then he told me he'd seen the Shatterpaw another 6 or 7 times over the years. He said it was hunting him. Or at least that's what he believed. He said he'd be out in the woods, sometimes with us, and he'd look over and see it standing far away between the trees, just watching him, always watching. He said he could feel it communicating with him. Not with words, straight into his mind, telling him it wanted him, promising that one day it would get him. So this trip, he said, was his last chance to get the Shatterpaw first before it finally came for him one night and dragged him off to whatever hell it came from. My first thought, of course, was that the brain tumor had finally started messing with him. And suddenly I realized how insane it was that I'd taken a dying man with a neurological condition deep into the wilderness. I felt like an absolute lunatic. So, I did the only thing that made sense in that moment. I pretended I believed him about the Shatterpaw. We spent the next few hours stumbling around the forest like 2 amateurs pretending to be professional hunters. We cracked twigs, brushed against branches, and made enough noise to wake every creature within 5 miles. Not that I cared. The thing we were tracking didn't exist, and the whole situation felt like make-believe. Except one of us was a fully grown man who ran a general store, and the other was an 82-year-old with a brain tumor who could barely stay balanced without his cane. And here's the thing. I wasn't completely reckless. Grandpa had no idea that the rifle he was carrying was one I had quietly disabled back at my store. The firing mechanism was dead. Even if he tried to pull the trigger, nothing would happen. Shatterpaw or no Shatterpaw, I wasn't letting a dying old man wander around the woods at night with a loaded weapon. I might be dumb, but I'm not that stupid. Unfortunately for me, Grandpa wasn't stupid either. We'll get to that in a second. Eventually, the sun dipped behind the trees, and everything shifted from gold to blue to pitch black. We cooked burgers over the little camp stove, sat by the quiet crackle of the flame, and finally crawled into the tent to sleep. A few hours later, Grandpa shook me awake. "Can you smell it?" he whispered. Bleary-eyed, confused, I sniffed the air. I told him I couldn't smell a damn thing, which was true. My sense of smell has always been garbage. He waved me off, reminding me of that with a, yeah, I know, and then, out of nowhere, added a new layer to the Shatterpaw mythology he'd apparently cooked up. Apparently, the creature gave off a powerful stench, but only 10% of the population could detect it. Like how some people can smell blood or cyanide. I wanted to ask why this little detail hadn't come up earlier, but hell, it was all fiction anyway. What did it matter? So I told him that if the Shatterpaw was really out there, we should stay put. Grandpa shook his head. "No way, he's out there. Grab your gun, Sonny. We're confronting this beast." And before I could say anything, he was already climbing out of the tent. For a second, a tiny sliver of logic cut through the fog of disbelief. Maybe some kind of real animal was nearby, or even a person. So I grabbed my rifle and followed him out. Weirdly, he'd left his rifle inside the tent. The second I stepped out, I saw Grandpa had lit the bonfire, flames flickering wildly against the trees. Shadows stretched in every direction, bending and twisting in the orange glow. I glanced around. "Where's the Shatterpaw?" I asked. Grandpa turned toward me with this look, cold, heavy, and break-heartingly serious. "I think you know." Then he reached into his waistband and pulled out a handgun. My stomach dropped. He told me he knew all along that I sabotaged his rifle. He said he was sorry for stealing the revolver from my store, but he needed a working weapon. Said the real me would thank him if I was still alive somewhere inside. Then he pointed the gun at me. His hand trembled. Tears streaked down his wrinkled cheeks. His voice cracked. "You hide it well, boy. You always have. It took you one day, and it's been you ever since." "What? Grandpa, I'm not the damn Shatterpaw. You know I'm not." He shook his head, refusing to hear it. He said it was him or me. Said the only way to prove I wasn't the creature is if I shot him in the head, or he'd shoot me instead. I dropped my rifle to the ground. Grandpa froze, thrown off. Then a flicker of shame crossed his face. I told him I knew exactly what he was trying to do.
that he wanted to go out on his terms, that this insane plan was the best he could come up with to make it happen. He was a die-hard Christian. Ending it himself wasn't an option. But if I shot him believing it was kill or be killed, I could forgive myself. I asked him if that was what he wanted.
He nodded, lowered the gun. A part of me wanted to be furious. How could the man I loved more than anyone trick me into killing him? But then I realized, in that dying, fog-filled brain of his, he was putting his fate in the hands of the person he trusted most. I told him this wasn't the way. He nodded again, eyes softening. I stepped forward to hug him, to take the gun away. Everything happened at once. A sound, a low, rumbling growl. Grandpa's eyes widened, and he whipped the pistol up again. For a split second, I thought he'd changed his mind and was about to shoot me, but he screamed, "Get down!" I dove left, hitting the dirt so hard it knocked the wind out of me. 3 gunshots cracked through the night, loud enough to rattle the trees. Then a heavy thud, a body hitting the ground. I rolled over, heart pounding, and saw the truth. And out of everything in this entire story, this is the part no one ever believes, but it happened. It wasn't a Shatterpaw. It wasn't a Bigfoot. Not a Wendigo, not a Skinwalker. A cougar, a full-grown mountain lion, had been stalking us the entire time, creeping closer while we argued. By the time Grandpa noticed it, the thing was already coiled to leap straight onto me. The old man, with a brain tumor and shaking hands, put a bullet right between its eyes on the first shot. 5 days. That's how long it took us to drag that mountain lion back to town, wrapped in a sleeping bag and tied to a makeshift sled. We rationed food, we barely slept. Grandpa's condition went downhill fast. He developed a lung infection before we even got home. He declined quickly after that, but he lived long enough to see that mountain lion taxidermied and displayed proudly in my store, with a plaque telling part of the story. It's gone now. I donated it to a museum about 10 years back in his honor, but I still have the old photo somewhere from before digital cameras. Grandpa passed away in his sleep a couple months after that trip. Not peacefully, cancer never allows that, but he went gracefully. Before he died, he admitted the whole "you're the Shatterpaw" idea was something he stole from a TV show he watched in the rec room. But there was one thing he never backed down from: the Shatterpaw itself. That first sighting, that creature with the shattered paw prints in the dirt. He swore that part was real, swore it until his last breath. And no matter how much I search, I've never found a single mention of a cryptid called the Shatterpaw. Maybe Grandpa really did see something out there. Maybe he named it himself. He'd love that as a legacy. So, if anyone out there ever comes across this thing, if you ever see the legendary Shatterpaw, let me know. I'd like to tell it that it made an old man very, very happy in his final days.
Thanks for listening, friends. Hit that notification bell for all future narrations. And if you've got a story of your own, send it to me at nikomaxasan@gmail.com. You might just hear it in the next video.